Can you hear me? Okay. There we go. That's a little better. Everybody wake up. Mid-morning. Okay, so this is actually really good positioning for this talk, so thank you, Linda, for that organization. So I'm going to ask you to kind of take a step back and think about EarthScope as a whole. So Megan talked a lot about UNAVCO and the science that's being done with the data that we collect and archive. Chuck talked about a lot of the cyber infrastructure, and if you listened carefully, you probably heard little glints in there about dissemination of that information. And at AGU, John Tabor and myself co-presented, so I'm going to have to do half of this presentation that John actually wrote and presented, but he's my counterpart at IRIS. And EarthScope is a huge project, as you all know. And UNAVCO is a part of it, IRIS is a part of it, and then there's also the EarthScope National Office. And each of these three entities has a small group devoted to making sure the public and our community know about all the things that we're doing. And so what we wanted to do was to kind of talk about how the facilities are really uniquely positioned to do this for a variety of reasons. At the time when we submitted this, our team here at UNAVCO, ECE, was in a bit of flux, and IRIS was as well. So I should also acknowledge that a lot of the work that's in here is from Aisha and Beth Bartel as well, and Beth Pratt-Situla as well as Shelley. So I was going to give you just a really quick overview of the E&O that's been going on for EarthScope, focusing in on facilities and why we're important, and then also really the role that the community has in trying to broaden our impact, and then a little bit about the future direction since we still have about 4 3/4 years to go. So if you think about EarthScope from a communication standpoint, there's a lot of challenges. So if any of you have ever done a research project, or if you've done anything and tried to tell your friends and family about it, you have a small network, you can kind of talk to them about it. Your project's usually pretty local, but EarthScope spans the entire continent. It's over a decade long. There's a lot of stuff happening, and from a dissemination standpoint, if you think about how the technology has changed since EarthScope started, it's unbelievable. Social media was not on anybody's radar 10 years ago, and so now we have to kind of rethink what we're doing, not unlike what Chuck was talking about, rethinking how we're actually going to get this information out to people. Oh. For anybody that's online, you can enjoy the circa 1972 2 a.m. television screen. Yeah. There you go. Exactly. There you go. That one looks good. Go to the next one. Okay, so let's try this again. Okay, so trying to get the community, our community, UNAVCO community, IRIS community, broader community, to understand what EarthScope is, what's available, trying to get teachers to integrate it into the classroom so we can get the next generation of scientists interested, is a huge effort. And so from the beginning, there's actually an education and outreach plan for EarthScope that was designed that had a specific plan of how they were going to do this. And even since I've been here twice, we've kind of looked at it again and said, okay, how do we need to update this? You can see, though, that in order for us to really be effective, the role is to, as I like to say, facilitate, because we're a facility, so we can't do everything, so we partner with lots and lots of organizations. Some of them are more science-focused, Some of them are more education focused, and we're trying to hit different levels of education as well. So our facilities, I don't know. You know what it is? It's PowerPoint. I had to use PowerPoint because that's what Iris uses. John couldn't handle the keynote. Coming back to this. Don't go too far, Jamie. So this is just an example of some of the things that UNAVCO and IRIS have been doing. So one is real, and this is, I should say too, it's not that the ECE or the E&O programs are doing this. We're just really trying to help broadcast it and broaden it. So all the stuff that the data group does to provide all the different formats of data that you saw in Chuck's talk, trying to work with them to make sure, if we just tweak this a little bit, teachers could actually use it in high school. So can we make that change? Trying to make sure that we have accessible data for a wide variety of audiences, disseminating the EarthScope science results. Linda heads up the science snapshots. There were some workshops, international workshops that happened last summer. And then communicating broader impact, which is huge, and which we really try to help our community with because they're required to do it for NSF. On the right, you see actually something called our Active Earth. It's the Active Earth Monitor. It's in a lot of museums around the country. It has UNAVCO PBO content on it as well as the IRIS materials as well. Okay, I'm going to try to change the slide. Woohoo! Okay. Why are we well positioned to do this? Because we're a facility and we basically have a community. So a PI award is typically 3 years, maybe 5 years. And it's really tough to kind of make a big impact over a short period of time, especially when they're really focused on the science. So we're able to actually develop and establish and maintain long-term relationships with those groups that you saw before that will help us make that sustained impact. And the other thing that's really quite nice is that, and you'll see yet another word cloud here, is that we have a really broad array of expertise. So we have expertise in science education, in geology, in web development, in communications, and journalism, and evaluation. And so it helps us to be able to draw on a lot of those different talents as we're trying to communicate. So the strengths, again, I mentioned continuity. Collectively, working with IRIS, working with the national office, we're able to make a much bigger impact than a single PI is. And the other reason the facility is really well positioned to do this is because we're very close to the research. So we can, call up the PIs and say, okay, we looked at this paper, we don't quite understand, we want to, do a Facebook post about it, and, can you provide some clarity or things like that? You can see actually, so Chuck talked a little bit about Christine Larson's PBO H2O portal, which is fantastic for getting data. And Christine is a huge advocate of education and helping teachers understand the science that's happening. So a portion of that entire portal is all devoted to outreach. And Beth Bartel worked on this last year and put in spotlights for all the different, many of the different GPS stations. So Chuck was saying, he knows these stories. And a lot of the PIs know some stories about it, or engineers, and so Beth was able to go through and help Christine populate this so that it's a great resource. We also are able to reach a lot more audiences than a typical PI would be able to. So we have some capacity to go to national festivals. In fact, this spring, every other year, in Washington, D.C., they have the USA Science and Engineering Festival, and Beth's going to be going and representing that again. We do workshops, we can reach a whole bunch of people. I'm going to really quickly go through these slides because these are kind of different audiences. And just so that all of you are aware, if there's anything that's particularly compelling about any of the talks today, Jamie's recording them all, and eventually Melissa's going to go ahead and convert them all and post them on YouTube. So you can tell your friends, you can tell your family, if you're looking for a quick 15-minute refresher. We provide professional training and outreach, and you can see here we have short courses at UNAVCO. IRIS does the same thing. My goodness, I'm like the worst educator ever. We have undergraduate impacts. You can see here, this is a lot of the summer research programs. So Aisha's, the program that Aisha manages, the Recess program. There's a counterpart one in IRIS. They have an internship program as well. We actually reach out to diverse audiences. So SACNIS is actually the Society for the Advancement of Chicanos and Native Americans in Science. ACES is the counterpart for the American Indians and the National Association of Black Geoscientists. Some of you may not even be aware of this part. This is kind of the IRIS-focused stuff, but when they were citing the USArray, they actually partnered with universities and had undergraduate students go out and talk to landowners and negotiate and find the siting locations. And they were able to make a pretty big impact in that regard. It's a pretty big undertaking. We try to get as much data into the classroom as possible, not just into the university classroom, but the K through 12. If any of you can think back, or if you have kids that are in school, earth sciences in general is only taught in middle school. And so it's really challenging for even high school science teachers who want to include it to be able to fit it in. And so we're able to help them with all the great data products that are created by both UNAVCO and IRIS. Another area that we've been a little bit more involved in is creating educational animations. So you can see the one on the left there that Beth Pratt-Sichula worked with IRIS and others on through her CTEP project. We help sponsor that. It's available on YouTube. It's like 5 minutes. A great explanation of why GPS is important. Why should you support the Plate Boundary Observatory? So we need to make sure that people who are funding us are aware of this. We reach out to K through 12 teachers. Lots of a rich history of workshops. Teachers on the Leading Edge total. Now we have CTEP, which I believe Beth is going to talk a little bit about, bringing together different kinds of educators. IRIS actually has a program called Seismographs in Schools, where they have a cohorts of teachers. It's really strong in Michigan, but spreading across through the country, where teachers actually have a seismograph in the school, and they use it as a teaching tool. And they're very simple and inexpensive. And then, of course, the general public, and some of you may actually see some of the work that you're doing here, some science cafes, getting out to and participating in interpretive workshops. And the other thing that I just want to point out, too, is that social media has been a really great way in the last year, year and a half, almost 2 years, to really promote and work collaboratively both with IRIS and with the EarthScope National Office. We actually have a really interesting little network of social media folks who all promote each other's material, and so we're reaching a really broad audience in that regard. I would strongly encourage you this afternoon to stop by and see Shelley's poster. We are super excited that we have a GPS-focused museum display that was installed the second week in January. And how many visitors have we had so far? Quite a few, right? Yeah. 250,000 people a year who will learn about GPS and why it's important, and she has a great poster about that. There's general publications that these are written in digestible terms, so things that people can understand. The science snapshots that Linda leads. The insights are actually produced by the EarthScope National Office, and we're really working to have a bigger presence for UNAVCO in those, because that's EarthScope-wide. So generally what you can see here is there's a lot of stuff going on, and the reason that a lot of stuff can go on is because we're partnering with lots of organizations, and we're trying to kind of maximize our impact. You can see here, even in the kind of the more popular media, EarthScope gets infused. The #1 most awesome experiment in the universe. Some things that have been identified about working on such a big project over such a long time period is really to focus. There's lots of stuff that we could do, but you really have to be targeted about what you're going to focus on and do those well, and make sure that the metrics are there so that you can demonstrate the value. And like I said, defining this impact isn't easy. You have to figure out what you want to really measure. this really does take a number of people working around, full time, I should say, and in some cases actually more than just the 9 to 5, in order to really make that impact. And the distributed nature of our facility, because we're a community basically, it lets us really have a pretty broad impact. And this is really important. This is actually the second time, so Chuck already mentioned this. Telling the story of the science as opposed to just the facts is really what reaches people and gets people excited and helps them understand. Just really briefly, kind of the future, because there is 4.5 years that we need to really focus on EarthScope. The transportable array is moving to Alaska, and every opportunity that I have, I point out, like, well, we've been in Alaska for a really long time. How can we help you? There's a lot more that we can do, especially in the Northeast U.S. They've had a big impact just recently with their new sightings. There's some partnerships that are happening in Alaska in order to reach out, working with the University of Alaska Fairbanks. There's going to be a presence, an ECE presence up in Alaska in April for an interpreters workshop, and working with local communities there to try and make sure that everybody's aware the role that PBO has been playing. And the other thing that we're really going to focus on is that this impact and making sure people are aware of EarthScope and what EarthScope is and the great science that's coming out of it is kind of a shared responsibility between the facilities, between the researchers, between the educators. So a lot of our researchers are also educators. And another thing that I think is worth pointing out is this last item, which is to target a wider science community as well as the general public. I don't come from a geology science background, but the atmospheric science background, and I can clearly see so many connections and so many things that are of interest. And the hydrology community as well. There's so many interdisciplinary aspects to what the Plate Boundary Observatory is and what UNAVCO does, that by reaching out, we're really going to be able to have a much more substantial impact as we go forward. So thank you very much, especially with all the technical difficulties.